subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar where we're going to be taking a look at a very important topic, and that is cleaning data in Excel. Now, I say this is an important topic, and it is, but it's an often overlooked part of analyzing data successfully. Because if you don't clean up your data set properly prior to analyzing it, so maybe you have a data set and you want to convert that to a pivot chart, or maybe analyze it using a table, maybe even if you just want to use things like sort and filter on your data, if your data set isn't clean, then it's going to start throwing up some really strange results. So whilst it does take a bit of time to clean up your data set at the beginning, it is definitely worth it in the long run. So for those of you who are new to our webinars, I will just very briefly introduce myself. So my name is Deborah Ashby, and I'm an IT trainer specializing in the design, delivery, and facilitation of Microsoft courses, both online and in the classroom. And I do a lot of these Excel training sessions. I absolutely love Excel, and I think you're really going to enjoy some of the things that we're going to walk through today. So without further ado, let's take a look at our agenda so you know exactly what it is that we're going to be covering. So we're going to start out just by talking very briefly about why it's important to clean data. I've mentioned a couple of little points there, but I just want to expand on that a little bit. And then we're going to dive straight into cleaning up an Excel worksheet. And we're going to run through 10 data cleaning tips and tricks. So there's loads of things which we're going to include in here. So things like deleting blank rows, how you can clear formatting, remove any duplicates, do things like change the case, tidy up values, things like that. So lots and lots of little tips and tricks I'm going to show you in there, which you can apply to any kind of data set. So not just the kind of data that I'm using, but any data that you need to clean, all of these tips are going to be useful. We're then going to move on to importing data from different sources, and we're going to import a file, a text file, and also an access file as well. And I'm going to show you how you can clean up those types of file. We're going to concentrate a little bit on using text functions to extract and clean data, because it is a really important part that you know those. They're not particularly complicated, but really good things to have in your toolkit. And then towards the end of this session, I'm going to show you some things in Power Query. Now, if you've never used Power Query in Excel before, and I will say Power Query is available in Excel from Excel 2010 onwards, and depending on which version of Excel you have, it has changed very slightly in each version. But in general, it all works the same. I'm going to show you how you can do things like import and use the cleaning utilities within Power Query to clean up files and also combine different files together as well. And then right at the end, I'm just going to show you how all that works when it comes to updating your data also. So quite a few different things that we're going to run through. So let's very quickly just run through why it's so important to clean data. Well, as I've mentioned, data can be from many different sources. So it might be that you have a data set that you've put together yourself in Excel, or it might be that you have data stored somewhere else that you want to bring into Excel. So that might be a text file, it might be a CSV file, it might be an access file. Or it might be that you regularly connect or download a report from an internal system or an external system, maybe something like SAP, and you analyze that data. So if you work in sales, you might have an internal sales system that you can extract data out of and import into Excel. So all of those kinds of scenarios, you're going to need to know some tools for cleaning up data, because as we know, when you import data into Excel, particularly if it's from an external system, the majority of the time, it's not going to come across in the perfect format. There's going to be some amount of tidying that you're going to need to do first. So that's what I really want to start out by showing you, all of the different tools and techniques that you can apply to tidy up any data set. Now, before we do that, I just want to show you a very quick example as to why this is important. So we're going to start out with, I'm going to open this file just here. Now, this is just some data. In general, this is data that I use when I'm running a pivot tables training course. And this data has already been cleaned. You can see it looks fairly consistent, nice and organized. It's in columns. This is pretty much good to go. Now, if I just go and apply a filter to this heading row, so if I go up to data and just turn on filters, in column B, we have the stores listed out. So this is sales data for a couple of stores. And you can see here, I only have two stores, Computech and Microworld. Now, if when I was putting this data together, or if I was adding data to the bottom, what if I make a slight spelling mistake? So let's just go into this cell just here, and I'm just going to pretend that I've accidentally hit an E as I've been typing this in. When I now click that store drop down, you can see that Excel thinks I now have a third company listed here because it's slightly different. I've got a spelling mistake. So if I was to not notice that and then go away and create some kind of chart where I'm maybe reviewing the amount of sales per store, it's going to show me that I have 3 stores when actually I only have 2. Now, that's just a very minor mistake, but hopefully that illustrates to you quite nicely how your analysis can then start to go a little bit wrong, particularly if you have lots and lots of these very tiny mistakes throughout your data. Okay. So let's close this down and take a look at some of the things that we want to be running every time we import a data set or before we analyze our data. So I'm going to open up this file just here, sales data original. And I will say that this data that I have in here, I'm not connected to any kind of external system. So this is a bit of a contrived example. I've basically just messed up one of my spreadsheets so I can run through and show you all of these different techniques. So let's take a look at this data. You can see it looks a little bit of a mess. We've got some inconsistencies when it comes to case, particularly in column B. We have some weird formatting going on. So I can see that here I have some borders applied. I also have some rows that are highlighted in gray and some things that are in bold. I've got these hash symbols in here, and I can see in general this isn't very well formatted. I've also got some blank rows in here as well, which I'm probably going to want to remove. So let's run through and take a look at some techniques we can use to tidy this data up. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is so that I can see all of my data, I want to make sure I've widened out these columns, because with these columns just here, J to L, you can see we have these little hash marks in here. It looks a little bit like a fence. This normally means that the column isn't wide enough for the data contained within them. So the first thing I'm going to do here is make sure that all of my columns are expanded out so that they are the width of the longest item within that column. Now, a quick way of doing this is if I hover my mouse over column A until I get that little black drop down arrow, click and drag across to highlight all of these columns, I can then hover my mouse over any of the dividers until I get that double-headed black arrow, double click, and it's going to widen all of those columns in one go. And you can see now those little hash marks have disappeared. Now that I've done that, I'm going to deal with my next problem. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I want to delete out any blank rows in my data. And this is a really common problem, particularly if you're importing from external systems, blank rows and blank cells. Now, if I don't remove these blank rows, that's going to cause me a real problem when I try to analyze, particularly if I'm trying to put something into a pivot table. So let's go through and remove all of these blank rows. Now, once again, I'm going to highlight all of the columns because that's where my blank rows are. From the Home tab all the way over in the Editing group, I'm going to click on Find and Select, and I'm going to say Go to Special. Now, from here, this is where I can tell Excel to find something in my selected area. And in this case, I want to find all of the blanks. And if I click on OK, there we go. It's now highlighted all of those blank rows, which means I can now delete them all in one go. So again, from the Home tab, in this Cells group just here, I have a Delete drop down, and I can now say Delete Sheet Rows, and it gets rid of all of them in one go. Now, obviously, if you've got a reasonably small data set and you can just see a couple of rows in there, you can delete them manually as well, simply by right-clicking and just saying delete. But if your data set is very large, that's going to be tedious. So you're probably going to want to use the find and select method instead in order to get those deleted efficiently. Now, another thing that you might come across is you might have the odd blank cell that you want to fill a value in quickly. Now, I don't, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete out some information in this sales column. So let's just say I had some blank cells going on like this. Now, what I can do is I can add in a number or a word or anything I want in one go in this particular column. And once again, it's better to have something in the cell than nothing. Again, particularly if you're going to use something like a pivot table, instead of a blank cell, if there is actually no data, I'm probably going to want to put a 0 in there as opposed to just leaving it blank. So what I could do is I could select this column. I'm going to use that same method, find and select. Now, I could go up here and go to special again. Another way of doing this would be to press the keyboard shortcut Control G, and then I can click the special button. I'm going to choose blanks, which is going to highlight all of those blank cells. And if I want to put a 0 in all of these cells in one go, I can type 0 and press Control, Enter, and it's going to fill all of those blank cells. I didn't have to put a 0 in there. I could have put null or maybe blank or whatever I wanted to. But just remember, the important point here is once they're all highlighted, type what you need, Control Enter to fill that across all of those blank cells. Okay, so a nice quick way of doing that. Now, the next thing I'm going to deal with is I'm going to remove some of this weird formatting. So I can see here in rows 3 to 6 at the top, I've got some borders applied around these cells. Don't particularly want that. I also have some grey formatting on some of these rows, and also some of these are in bold as well. So it's not particularly consistent. I want to get rid of all of that formatting. So a way that I can do this is I could select all of the columns once again. On the Home tab, in that editing group, I have a clear button. And when I click the drop down, I have a number of different options. Now, if I was to click clear all, that's going to clear all of the values out of the cells as well. So I don't want to do that. I want to leave the values there. I just want to remove any formatting that's on top. So I'm just going to go for clear formats. And like magic, that gets rid of all of that strange, inconsistent formatting. Now, one thing you'll also notice is that I did have the first row here, the heading row, that did have a fill background color, but I'm going to deal with that a bit later. At the moment, I don't mind that that's been removed because we're going to put this in a table which will automatically apply formatting a bit later on. The next thing I want to deal with is you always want to make sure that you check your data for duplicates. Okay, so when I'm talking about duplicates, I mean complete duplicates. So I want it to check to make sure that I don't have every single column duplicated, because that would essentially be a duplicated record. It doesn't matter if I have this duplicated. So for example, in column A, you can see here, I have a few duplicates. I have government numerous times in here, but it doesn't mean that the entire row of data is the same. It's just in that particular column. So I want to tell Excel, remove duplicates where every single column is the same, because to me, that is a complete duplicate record. So once again, I'm going to click in my data. I'm going to jump up to the Data tab, and fortunately, Excel has its own Remove Duplicates button. And you'll find this in the Data Tools group just here, and it's this button in the middle. You'll see as I hover over, Remove Duplicates. If I click it, this is where it's going to ask me, which columns do I want to check for duplicates? Now, the thing that's really important here is to specify that your data has headers. So I've got to check in that box, and I only want to remove the duplicate if every single column is the same. So I have all of the column headings selected. Let's click on OK. You can see that it's found 9 duplicate records, and it's automatically removed them for me. So very quick and easy to do. A couple of other things I want to do here is I want to check to make sure that I have the correct formatting applied to my columns. So for this, we're going to stay on the Home tab, and we're going to be working in this number group in the middle. This is where we find all of our different number formats. Now, each column in Excel should have the correct or an appropriate formatting applied to it. So for example, if we take a look at column A, what type of data do I have in here? I have text. Now I can see currently, if I look in this number group, it's telling me that I have general formatting applied to column A. And general formatting is kind of just your standard run-of-the-mill formatting. Now for things like text, it's absolutely fine to have general formatting applied, or if you wanted to, from the drop-down, you could choose to format this as text. It doesn't really matter when it comes to text in columns. If I click on the next one, that's general, I'm just going to leave these all as general. When I get to units sold, I've got numbers in here. Now I don't want this on general. I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to change this to numbers. And I can then choose if I want decimal places or if I don't. So in this case, I'm going to say I don't want 2 decimal places. Back up in my number group, I'm going to take those decimal places down. Now for the next few columns, so basically from F all the way across to K, these are all columns that contain monetary values. So I want to apply currency formatting to these, or even accounting formatting. So I'm going to click the drop down and let's go for accounting format. I've got my $ in the front there. Remember, you can change that if you want to use a different symbol. And if I wanted to, I could take these decimal places down for these columns as well. Now, I'm going to leave these as 2 decimal places, exactly as they are. The next column across is the date column. Now, I definitely have some weird things going on in here. It's displaying a number as opposed to a date. And one thing to remember in Excel is that basically all dates are stored in Excel as numbers. And the number that you see is the number of days past the 1st of January 1900. That's basically the beginning of time according to Excel. Now, you can only see that number if you have the wrong formatting applied. So in column L, I have general formatting, so I'm seeing that weird number. These are supposed to display as dates, so I'm just going to change that to short date format to pull those through. And if I take a look at the rest of these columns, I can see that those are pretty much in a format that is absolutely fine. So we're getting there. It looks a little bit tidier than what it first did. Let's turn our focus to column F because we have something else weird going on just here. If you take a look at these cells just here, you can see that 2 of these cells look a lot different to the other numbers contained within this column. And that is because these numbers here, if I click this little warning symbol out at the side, it's telling me that these numbers are stored as text. And this is something that you'll find is very common when you're importing data into Excel. Occasionally, Excel will look at a number and it will determine that it's actually text as opposed to a number, which isn't correct in this case. And despite the fact that I've applied accounting format to this column, it still thinks that both of these numbers are text. Now, how do I know that? Well, if you take a look at the alignment of these numbers, in Excel, the general rule is that when you have text in a cell, the text is always aligned to the left-hand side. So if I widen out column A, I've got text in here, and you can see that all of that is aligned to the left of the cell. Whereas numbers are always aligned to the right-hand side of the cell. So if we take a look at column F, you can see that the ones that are correct are aligned to the correct side, whereas these 2 are aligned to the wrong side. So I want to make sure I convert these back into numbers. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Now, by far the easiest method is that when this happens, you will see this little warning message come up at the side. So I can click the drop down, and from this menu, I can say convert to number. That's going to move that across to the right-hand side of the cell, and then all I need to do is apply the correct formatting, which is the accounting format. Another way I could do this, a slightly more complicated way around, but this is a good method to use if for some reason you're not seeing that little warning pop up. What you can do is somewhere in your spreadsheet, type in the number 1. I know this seems a little bit strange when you first look at it. If If you type the number 1 and Control-C to copy it, what you can then do is select the cell or cells that you want to convert, go to Paste on the Home tab, down to Paste Special, and say Multiply. Click on OK. And that's basically going to convert that number. And again, all I need to do is apply a counting format to make that correct. Okay, so don't forget this little trick with the 1. If you can't see any other way, you're not getting that warning symbol to convert the number, to convert the text to number, you can always utilize that method as well. So now we have column F looking pretty good. What else do we need to do in here? Well, I can see that we've got some problems going on in column B. And let's widen this out a bit and take a good look at what we've got here. So we've got some countries listed in here, and I can see that I've got a couple of different problems going on. I've got some weird spacing issues. So if you look at what we have in cell B2, I've got some erroneous spacing at the beginning, the same down here. I could also have some spaces at the end, which I can't actually see, but sometimes we get weird spaces at the end as well. So we're going to want to deal with these weird spaces. And I can also see that I have inconsistent case going on in here. So some of it is in what we call proper case, where the first letter is capitalized. And then we've got some in uppercase as well. So I just want to go through and make everything consistent and the same. Now, to do this, we're going to combine a couple of text functions, and text functions are so important when you're cleaning your data. So it's good to learn a few which are really going to help you out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to insert what I like to call a helper column. So let's right click and just insert a new column. And this is what I'm going to use to essentially clean my column B. Now, the couple of functions that I want to use to remove these spaces and also convert this to proper case. The first one is trim. Now, what trim does is this will remove any leading spaces, any trailing spaces from words. And I use this all the time because, as I said, sometimes you can't see trailing spaces at the end. And all you need to do is open bracket. And if you take a look underneath, we only have one argument required for this particular function. And that is we need to tell Excel what text we want to trim. So I'm just going to say B2. Close that bracket, hit enter, and take a look at Canada now. It's removed all of those leading spaces. If I was to copy this down, I still have my casing issues, which we're going to sort out in a moment. But again, if we look at, say, this one, you can see those trailing or leading spaces have been removed. Same thing here, same thing here. Okay, so trim, really straightforward, really useful. Let me undo that, because the second function I want to use is the proper function. And this is going to allow me to convert the text to what we call proper case. Now, there are 3 functions you could use here: upper, lower, or proper. And you can probably imagine what each of them does. So let's start out with upper. If I type equals upper, again, we only have one argument, which is where is that text located? Cell B2. Enter. It's going to convert it to upper case. And I'm sure you can imagine what's going to happen if we were to change this to lower. It's going to convert everything to lowercase. Let's Control Z to undo. I want everything to be proper case. So that is the first letter capitalized, and then I can copy down. So very simple, 3 little functions there, which are really going to help you when it comes to maintaining consistency in your columns. Now, I actually want to combine the trim and the proper function because I don't want to do just one or the other. I want to apply both of them. So this is where we're going to combine 2 functions together. So what I can do is say equals trim, open bracket, and then straight away I'm going to launch into my proper function as well. Open another bracket, I define where the text is, so cell B2. And because I've opened 2 brackets, one for trim, one for proper, I need to make sure I close off 2 at the end. Enter, and then I can double click to copy that down. And that's going to copy both of those formulas down, and now I've applied 2 functions in one go. So nice and straightforward. Now, one thing to mention here is now essentially I have duplicated columns. I have similar data in column B and column C, and I want to keep the data that's in column C because this is the stuff that I've cleaned. So what you might think is that I can go here, right click and delete out this column, but it's not going to work. I'm going to get a column full of errors. And that's because in column C, I have formulas that refer to the data in column B. So how can I get around this? Well, a very simple way is to essentially copy the data and paste it over the top, but just paste the values. Now, when you use paste values, it basically throws away any underlying formulas and just pastes what you can see on the screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the column. I'm going to say Control C to copy the data. From the Home tab, we're going to go to Paste, and I'm going to choose Paste Values. As soon as I do this, you'll now see that if I look in the formula bar, I don't have those formulas listed there, but I do have essentially the result. So now all I need to do is move this heading across, so I can do Control C and a Control V, and then I can safely delete column B, and I'm not going to get any errors in that column. That paste values is so important if you have underlying formulas and you just want to get rid of them because they're causing a problem. So there we go. We've done quite a few things in here. A couple of other little things that you might want to do when it comes to cleaning is utilize something like find and replace. So again, if we're taking a look at column B, I can see that where I have USA, I don't particularly like the way that this looks. So we've got an uppercase U and then a lowercase SA. So maybe I want to replace USA with United States of America. Once again, I can select this entire column. If I wanted to select the entire worksheet, I could do that as well. And a quick way of getting to your replace is to press Control H, which is going to pull up the Find and Replace box and jump us straight to that Replace tab. So now I can say what it is that I'm looking for. So I want to replace wherever I have USA in that format, I want to replace it with United States of America. Replace all. It's made 140 replacements. And there we go. So a nice quick way to change what you have in your columns. So I'm pretty happy with the way that this is looking. The final thing I would always do once I've cleaned up my data, however I've chosen to do that, I would always put my data into a table. This is so important, particularly if you're going to be analyzing it. It really does help you a lot when it comes to filtering, sorting, and also when you add new data, it automatically becomes part of the table. So I would always recommend to put your data into an Excel table. So a quick way of doing that is just to click somewhere in your data and press the keyboard shortcut Control T. It's going to ask you where is your data. Now, if you're clicked within your data, it's going to pick up all of the data surrounding where you're clicked. If you do have column headings like I do, make sure that you have My Table Has Headers selected and click on OK, and that's going to put your data into a table. As soon as you have that data in a table, don't forget that you get the Table Design Contextual tab at the top, which is going to allow you to do things like change the table style. So if you don't particularly like the way it looks, you could switch this to something else entirely. So maybe I want it to look like that in orange. Okay, now I'm not going to go too much into tables because this is really the final step that I would do before I maybe create something like a pivot table. Okay, so we've gone from a data set that looks really messy, tidying it up and getting it into a really nice format ready for analysis using 10 different techniques. So now that we've looked at that example, let's import some data this time. So we started from an Excel spreadsheet. Now we're going to import in something that's contained within a text file. So I'm going to close down Excel. And let me pull up, and let's go back. We're going to use this file just here. So let's take a look at what this file looks like. I'm going to double click to open it up. Now, Sometimes, particularly if you're working with an external system, sometimes you might download data from an external system and it might download in some kind of text file or a CSV file. And what we've got here is just a typical example of some data in a text file. Now, it's not a lot of data, it's just a little bit of HR data, but this will hopefully give you an idea. So what we have in this top row is basically the column headings. So we've got employee name, followed by hire date, salary, department, and job title. And one thing you'll notice in here is that each of these column headings essentially are separated with a semicolon. And that is really, really important. You might find that when you download your data, or if you're opening up another text file, these fields could be separated in a number of different ways. So it might be that they have a comma in between each field, or maybe a space, or maybe a tab. It could be any kind of character. And we call this the delimiter. Okay, so that terminology is really important because we're going to use that in a moment. So in this particular text file, I have a semicolon as my delimiter, the thing that separates each of my fields. And you'll see as we go down to the next record, we have people listed by their surname, followed by their first name. Then we have the delimiter, and then we have the hire date, followed by the salary, followed by their department, and then their job title. And that carries on through the rest of these records. And it looks really weird and it's hard to read because not everything is in a nice column, but we're going to sort that out when we import this in. Okay, so just bear in mind, that's the text file we're going to be importing, and the semicolon is the delimiter that we're using. So let's close this file down and jump back to Excel. And let's take a look at how we can import. Now, there's always a few different ways. Now, I'm going to start with, let's just start with a blank workbook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say File, and we're going to go to Open. Now, if you have your file stored somewhere, you would click on Browse and find the folder where this file is stored. Now, because I've recently used this text file, I can see it's sitting here in my recently used list. So we have import text1.txt. So I'm going to select to open it, and straight away Excel pops up the text import wizard. So it's recognized that the data that I'm trying to import is in a different file format. It's a text file. So I'm going to run through this wizard. Now, there's a couple of decisions I need to make here. The first one being, what is the type of data that I have in this particular text file? If you take a look at the bottom, I can see a little preview of the data within this text file. Now, the two choices I have are delimited or fixed width. And if we take a look at delimited, which has been selected by default for me here, it says characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. Now, if you remember, we have a semicolon separating our fields. This is a delimited file. So I'm going to keep it on delimited, and I'm going to say, yes, my data has headers, and click on Next. Now I need to tell Excel what character my delimiter is. So what is this that's separating each of these fields? So for me, it's a semicolon. And take a look at what happens as soon as I select semicolon from this list. So I'm going to take the tick out of tab, say semicolon, and you can see that it's now divided up my data wherever that semicolon exists. So now all I need to do is click on Finish, and it's going to pull that data in. So now that I have it in Excel, I can essentially run through and start applying some of those techniques that we learnt in the last lesson. So the first thing I'm going to do here is highlight all of my columns and double click to widen them out. What else do I want to do here? Well, there's a few things. I can see currently I have everything in here is in capital letters. I also might decide that I want to split up the employee name. So for example, and if you ever have this, it's fairly common, you might decide that you want to split this into first name in one column, last name in another. So let's take a look at doing that first of all. So once again, I'm going to insert what I call a helper column. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I don't want this in uppercase. I want this in proper case. And I also want to apply trim. As I said, even if you can't see weird spaces going on, it's always a good idea to run trim in case there are any lurking at the end that you can't see. So we're going to do exactly what we did last time. We're going to say trim, proper, and then we're going to select cell A2 and close off both of those functions. Enter, and then I can double click to copy that down. Now again, remember, because we have formulas lurking behind here, if I was to delete out column A, I'm going to get errors in here. So we need to do our little paste special trick. So with the data selected, Control C to copy, up to paste, and we're going to say paste values to throw away those underlying formulas. And then what I can then do is just delete out column A, and then I can add name back into that heading. Okay, so very, very simple. Now that I've done that, I might decide, okay, well, I want to split up these names into first name, last name. So I'm going to add 2 more columns, or insert, I should say. Now, when it comes to breaking up data that's contained in one cell, again, this is something that you'll find yourself doing fairly often when you're cleaning up your data. It might be that you want to break up part numbers or people's names or email addresses, things like that. Anything that you want to split up, there's always a few different ways that you can do this. Now, one way you could do this, and this by far isn't my preferred method, but you could select all of this information, go up to the Data tab, and in the Data Tools group, you have a Text to Columns option. And this is going to open up that wizard again. So I could say, okay, delimited, and these names are separated with a comma. So if I say comma like that, it's going to split up those names for me. And then I'm going to have the surname and then the first name. I could use that method, and that might be something that works for you. But let me show you an even quicker way. We can utilize something called flash fill. And flash fill is probably one of my favorite things ever in Excel because it's so quick and it makes a task like this super easy. So let's say that in column B, I want the first name, and in column C, I want the last name. All I need to do is type in an example of what I want in the first name. So I want this one to say Jose. Click back in the cell, and then on the Data tab in the Data Tools group, we have this button just here. It's the Flash Fill button, and you can see that it has a keyboard shortcut of Control E, which you could use if you wanted to. Now, if I click this button, like magic, it copies all of the first names down. So nice and quick. I can invoke Flash Fill in a different way as well. So if I want to do exactly the same for the last names, all I need to do is tell Excel or tell Excel what it is that I want it to do. So I want the last name. As soon as I go to the cell underneath and start typing in the next one, so Abraham, can you see that it ghosts down the rest of them? So I can look at that and say to myself, okay, that looks correct. And when I hit enter, it's going to put all of those in for me. How nice and quick is that? And then I can simply right click and delete column A, and I have those names split up really nicely. So super easy. Flash fill, a great little tip, and you can use that on anything. It's really good for things like email addresses, anything that you want to break up. You can try and use flash fill. It doesn't work in every single scenario, and I am going to show you how you can split up things without using flash fill in a moment. But for the time being, let's go through the rest of this data because we've got a few straightforward things we need to do here. I want to make sure that I have the correct formatting applied to the hire date. So I'm going to say short date. For the salary column, I want these to be in, let's say, accounting format, and I'm going to take those decimal places down to 0. The department, now there's a couple of things I want to do here. I want to change the case, obviously, but I also want to switch out where we have MKTG. Instead of that, I want to replace that with the word marketing. Now, what I could do here is I could add in a helper column, and I could run our proper function to change all of this to proper case. And then I could do find and replace as we did previously by pressing Control H. But why bother doing two of those things when I can basically achieve the same thing just by using a couple of functions? As I'm already in cell F2 and I'm about to type in the proper function, I might as well use another function which is going to convert marketing, or MKTG, to the word marketing. So for this, I can use the substitute function. And you can see as I've started to type that in, it's come up underneath. I can just press tab and that takes me onto my first argument. Now I also want to apply the proper command. So let's type that in next and open a bracket. With my proper command, I want to change what we have in cell E2. I'm going to close that off and press comma, and you can see that I'm now back into my substitute function argument. So we want to tell Excel what our old text is. So I'm basically going to do a substitute. I'm going to substitute MKTG with the word marketing. So my old text needs to go in quote marks. I'm going to say MKTG, comma. I need to tell Excel what I want to replace it with. So I want to replace it with the word marketing. And close my bracket. Hit enter. And I've basically done both of those tasks in one go. I haven't had to do one function and then do something completely different by doing a find and replace. I can just handle it with formulas. Okay, so quite straightforward. But again, we're going to need to do our cut and paste trick. So let's select, Control C, paste special and paste values, and then we can safely delete out column E. Okay, and we're going to add that title back in, department. Now for the final one, this is just a very straightforward case. I just want to change this to proper text. And I'm going to do a little trim as well. So let's just very quickly do that so that everything looks nice. Enter, double click to copy down, Control C, and then paste values. And we can delete that out and just add back in our title. Okay, so again, a few different techniques in there when it comes to tidying up our data. Final thing I would do here is put this into a table, Control T. My table has headers. Okay, there we go. And I can change my table style if I need to. All right, so a few different things there to tidy up that particular text file. Now, let me take a look. We've got about 50. This lesson has gone so quickly. There's so much I want to show you in here. I am very quickly going to show you a few more text functions because these are so important. Now, you notice there that we have used some text functions. We've used proper, but we've seen how to use upper and lower as well. There are more text functions that you can use when it comes to tidying up your data. So let me show you a quick example underneath. Now, if I had something like, let's say ABC, maybe this is some kind of part number. So maybe I've got a long list of numbers which look something like this. And maybe I want to split these up so that I have the first 3 characters in one column, the next 3 characters in another, and the last 4 characters in another. So what I could do is I could use flash fill to do this, as we saw above, but I could also use text functions. So let's take a look at text functions. So what I can say here is equals, and the first text function that's useful is left, open bracket. So using this function, I can extract a certain number of characters from the left of the cell. So I want the first 3 characters. So let's take a look. My first argument here is text. So the text is contained in cell A24. The number of characters that I want to extract, well, I want the first 3. So I can press 3, close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to extract that for me, and I can copy that down. If I want to extract information that's in the middle of a text string, I can use mid. Again, the first argument is text, so my text is contained in cell A24. The next argument is the start number, so I need to count across how many characters. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want to extract is basically from the 5th character. So my start number is number 5, and I want to extract 3 characters. Close the bracket, hit enter, and I get those zeros. Then the final text function in here is working from the right. So you have left, mid, and right. So we're going to say equals right, pretty much the same. Select our text. How many characters from the right-hand side of the cell do we want to extract? We're going to say 4, close the bracket, hit enter, and there we go. Now, this works perfectly if you have consistent data. And again, a lot of the time, we're trying to break up information that isn't necessarily consistent. So, for example, if I was to double-click and add a D into here, this now no longer works because what I'm essentially extracting is the first 3 characters, and now we have 4 characters. So I could go in here and change this to say 4, which would be correct for the first one. But if I was to copy this down, it's now extracting 4 characters underneath, which is going to include that dash. So when you have inconsistent text or strings in a cell, this doesn't work so well. You have to do something a little bit different. Okay, so let me very quickly show you an example because I definitely want to make sure that we cover a little bit of Power Query before we end this lesson. So let's delete this out. And this time I'm going to add in my name. And let's do Adam's name as well. Oops. And let's do Juan also. So here, if I wanted to break this up, I would need to employ a different technique because all of these words or these words are different lengths, okay? So the way that we can do this is we need to essentially find what is consistent or what is the same between all of these different strings. So for me, I can see that something that occurs in each of these is a comma. So what I can do is basically work out where this comma is and then use that to work out what to extract for each of these. Okay, now this might seem a little bit confusing and I'm not going to spend as much time on this as I'd hoped because there is some other stuff I want to cover before we finish this lesson. But let me show you a couple of other different functions that are really useful. The first function is the search function. So if I just show you how this works. Search basically allows you to find the position of a specific character in a string. So if I wanted to find out the position number of the comma, what I can do here is say search and tell Excel what I'm looking for. So I need to put this in quote marks. I'm looking for the comma. I'm looking for it within this cell. And the last argument here, the start number, is actually optional. I don't have to add that in. So I'm going to close the bracket down, hit enter, and it's telling me that the comma is located in position 6 for me, position 6 for Adam, and position 7 for Juan. And I can use this information to extract other information. Another function that you'll find yourself using a lot when you're using text functions is the len function. And this will basically tell you the length or how many characters you have in the entire string. And there's only one argument, and that is the text. If I copy that down, you can see we have 14, 11, and 12 characters in the entire thing. So what I could do is use this information or use these functions in order to extract or split up these names using functions. So this is what this would look like. And again, if you're not used to using these, this can look a little bit complicated, but let's extract the last name first of all. I'm going to type in equals left, open bracket. I'm going to say where my data is, so cell A24, comma. Now I don't know the number of characters I want to extract. So basically what I want to do is I want to tell Excel to find where the comma is and extract everything before that. So we're going to add in as search because we're going to search for that comma. Open bracket. I'm looking for a comma. I'm looking for it within cell A24. And again, I don't need to add in a start number, so I can just close off my bracket. Now, because I've opened 2, I need to close 2. Now, look what happens if I hit enter. It's including that comma, okay? Because that is, I've said to it, basically find this comma, but it's going to include it. So what I need to do is basically say -1 character in order to get that extracted correctly. And then I can copy that down, and that's going to work no matter how long that last name is. All right, so this is a good way of doing it if you have inconsistencies. Now I could do something very similar for the last name, but this time we would use the right function instead. So let's say equals right, open brackets. The text I want is A24, but this time, because we're working from the right, to find the number of characters, I'm going to say, okay, give me the length of everything in that cell. I want to select cell A24. But this time, once it's found the length, I want it to minus everything up to that comma instead. So we're going to say minus search, and then we're going to find the comma from within this text just here. Close off both brackets, hit enter, and there we go, it's extracted. So a few different techniques that you can use in there, but all of these text functions are really important to know when it comes to tidying up your data, extracting, splitting things across columns, things like that. Okay. Right, let's close this down, and I want to finish up. And as I said, this lesson's gone so quickly. I want to finish up just by showing you a little bit about Power Query. Now, if you've never used Power Query before, this is a utility that you have in Excel 2010 going forwards. It's a great way of importing data, particularly if it's a large amount of data. So Power Query handles huge data sets really, really well. Now, we're going to be using very small data sets, but another good thing about Power Query is that it has its own inbuilt cleaning utilities. So all of this stuff that I've shown you in Excel, you can actually also do in Power Query, and it's a little bit more user-friendly because you don't need to know things like different functions, stuff like that. So it might be something that you want to explore. So let's close this down, and I don't want to save. And this time we are going to import a file from Access. So if we go to the Data tab, in this first group here, Get and Transform Data, if you ever want to import anything into Excel and you want it to, or you want to work with it in Power Query, this is the tab you would go to, this first group just here. So I could import a text file in this little area as well. I can import from the web. I can click Get Data, and I have all different types of file that I can import into Excel. So it really depends what it is that you want to import. So I'm going to say from database, from Microsoft Access database. So now I can go away and I can find the Access file that I want to import. So just bear with me a moment whilst I jump into my folder. There is my file, and I can click Import. Now what this is going to do is it's going to look it up and it's going to import it into Power Query. And you can see here I have this Access database has got 50,000 sales records in it. When I click on it, it's going to show me a quick preview of what this data looks like that I want to import. And then at the bottom, I have a few different buttons. So I could choose to load this directly into Excel. The Load To button will also let me load it directly into something like a pivot table. Now, if you want to utilize the cleaning functions within Power Query, you want to be clicking on Transform Data. So if I click Transform Data so you can see what this looks like, it's going to open up the Power Query editor. And this will look a little bit weird. If you've never been into here before, this is a little bit strange. It's quite a lot to get your head around, but it has the basic same structure as Excel. We have some ribbons at the top. So Home, we have Transform, Add Column, things like that. And this basically contains all of your cleaning utilities. So I can have my data in here, I can clean it up, and then I can load it into my Excel spreadsheet already clean. Okay. Now on the right hand side here where we have these query settings, I don't want you to worry too much about this, but one thing that's good to know is that every time you do something in this Power Query editor, you can see the steps that you've taken in this applied steps box. So if you need to backtrack, so maybe you do something and you think, actually, I don't particularly like that, or I don't want to do that, you can just click the cross and it will essentially undo the last action that you took. Now, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time in here at this stage. I would encourage you to come into here and have a little look through the different things that you can do. So, you know, there's a lot of the things that we've already done in Excel, you can do from within here as well. So things like removing duplicates. You can add different columns. You can split columns up, things like that. Okay, so definitely have a little look at all the different things you can do in here. One thing that's super important is to make sure that you have the correct data types in each of the column headings. So in this first group here, this is an ID column that I have, and you can see the data type is represented by this little icon at the top. So if I click this, it lets me change the type of data. So this is essentially a bit like formatting the columns. So I have a whole number in here, so I'm going to change that. And most of the time, you'll find that Power Query picks these up correctly. Now, this one is text, which I can see is correct. This is also text. And if I go all the way across, let's have a look. Now, order date, I can see here it's formatted it by default as date and time. Now, I don't particularly want times in order date, so let's change that to date to switch that back. Order ID is okay. The ship date, again, we have the time. I'm not interested in that. I just want the date. And then for some of these other columns, these are actually, again, currency values. I want to make sure I have currency applied to all of these columns. So it's always good to make sure you go through and you have the correct type of formatting applied to these particular columns. And let's do that final one just there. Now, I was going to go through and show you a few other different techniques in here, but we are running out of time. So I'll just very quickly show you how to load this. So once you've cleaned all of your data in here, if you go to the Home tab, you can choose the Close and Load button, and you can choose where you want to load that into. So if I say Close and Load, it's just going to load that into my Excel spreadsheet. And what it does is it basically creates a connection to your original data source. So I now have this data in Excel, but it's still linked to my Access table. So if anything changes in that Access table, it's going to basically update in this workbook as well, which makes it super useful if you're constantly updating things. All right, so that's how you can use Power Query and import that data into an Excel workbook. Now, the final thing I want to show you here again is using Power Query, but this is how you can import or combine multiple files together. So maybe you have data contained in lots of different sources, or maybe you have it in different Excel workbooks, and you want to combine everything together, bring it into Excel, and then clean up that data. So let me show you a bit more of an advanced technique when it comes to importing using Power Query. Now, I'm not going to save this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File Explorer, and I have a folder in here called Sales Records. Now, within this folder, I basically have 4 different files, and these contain sales information for 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And these files are very, very tiny. As I said, Power Query works wonderfully if you have a lot of data. Just for the purpose of demonstration, I basically have just very similar data in each of these files. The important thing here is that the data is consistent. It has the same layout. So we have the same columns across each of the different files. The information might change, but the column headings are pretty much exactly the same. And the data is in a table, and each table is named TBL. You can see here in table name, Table Sales 2015. If I was to open up this next file, it's going to be exactly the same, but the table is going to be called Table Sales 2016, so on and so forth. So what you might want to do is, if you have all of these, maybe you collect these each month or each year or however, each week maybe. If you have them all in one folder, you can append the new one each week and import that into Excel. So let me show you how you do that. Let's close this down. And I'm going to, again, just open up a blank workbook. So what I can do here is go to the Data tab, And again, we're going to go to this first group here. Remember, anytime you want to pull something in, this is the group you need to be in. I'm going to go to Get Data from File, and because they're all in one folder, I can just select the folder that contains these files. So now I need to navigate to the correct folder. So go to here, and there is my folder. Now, all I need to do is select the folder that contains these files, which is Sales Records, and click on Open. So what it's doing now is opening in Power Query. And you can see all of my files here. So we have 2015 to 2018. We have a column for contents. This is basically where the content is stored. Then we have the file name, and then we have all of this information that I don't really need. It's the date accessed, modified, so on and so forth. So what I could do here is say transform data, which will allow me to clean up the data, modify the data before I import it into Excel. Now, currently, the way this data is laid out, if I was just to close and load this into Excel, it's basically going to load what you can see here. But what I want is I want all of the information that's within each of these files. So I need to do a little bit of cleaning up, a little bit of tidying beforehand. Now, with this, a lot of these columns I don't particularly need. So I'm going to get rid of all of these columns except the content column and also this name column, so I know which piece of content relates to which year. Now, if you want to select columns in Power Query, if you hold down Shift, I'm going to select these first two. If I right click, I have an option here to remove all of the other columns apart from what I have selected, which is going to give me this. Now, essentially what I want to do is I want to tell Power Query that I want it to extract the table information from each of these sheets. So for this, I need to add a custom column. So if we go up to Add Tabs at the top and click on Add Column, in the first group, I can choose to add a custom column. And I'm going to give this column a name. So this is going to be, I want the tables to be extracted. So let's call it tables. And now I can add in a little Excel formula. So where we have equals, if I start to type in Excel, you can see I get a list of different things that I can select. I'm going to say Excel workbook, open bracket. I want to extract the content from each of the workbooks and close the bracket. Click on OK. So now it gives me another column where basically contained within here is the data within each table in the worksheet. So what I can do is where I have these two little arrows, if I click to expand it, it's going to show me all of the different column headings. I'm going to untick because sometimes that can give you a weird column heading name. Click on OK. And it's going to expand that information out. So what I'm now seeing in Power Query is I'm seeing the sheet and then the table. So the sheet name is 2015. The table that contains the data is Tubble Sales 2015, so on and so forth. All I'm interested in loading is the table information. So I can use my filters on this particular column and just select the table information, like so. Once I've done this, I can then go through and I can remove any columns that I don't need before I load it into Excel. Now, if we take a look at this, I can see that all I really want is this column here, the data column. This is what contains the tables essentially. I also want to have the name column because this tells me which table is related to which worksheet essentially. So what I can do here again is select both of these columns and I can remove all of the other columns and then I can expand the table data. And there we go. So now, because I don't have much information, there's just basically 4 or 5 rows per table, I can see that I have all of my 2015 data, all of my 2016 fields, all appended together. A couple of things I can do in Power Query when it comes to cleaning up this data before I load it into Excel is I can do things like find and replace. So with this first column, I'm not particularly interested in having the word TBL sales because all this column is doing is telling me what year this data applies to. So I can choose to replace the values just here. So if I select this first column and go to transform, I have a replaced values. So this is very similar to doing a find and replace in Excel. So the value to find here, I'm going to say find where it says Tubble underscore sales underscore, and I want to replace it with nothing. Click on OK, and now I just have the year in there. I'm going to rename this column by double clicking. I'm just going to call it year. And I could go through and use any of these cleaning utilities within Power Query to remove duplicates and do all of those kinds of things. So for example, again, if I want to select all of these columns, if I hold down Shift, maybe I want to make all of these uppercase. We saw how to do that in Excel using text functions. I can do that in Power Query as well. I can select my columns. I have a format drop down just here where I have lowercase, uppercase. This is essentially the proper command. I'm going to say uppercase to change these. I can go through and I can change the formatting as well. So for example, with these ones just here, I would probably want to go through and change these all to currency formatting. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that. Once I've got it into the format that I want, I can then go to the Home tab, close and load, and I can choose to close and load to. And this allows me to select a table in Excel. I can put it straight out to a pivot table or straight out to a pivot chart. Now I'm going to say table, click on OK, and it's going to pull that data through. Now, as I said, the cool thing about this is if you do clean your data or import your data this way using Power Query, if next month or next year, I should say in this case, I have more data to add to this, because we've essentially created a link to the folder that these files are contained in, if I minimize this down and open up this folder, when I add in a new file into this particular folder, so on the desktop I have my 2019 sales, let's do Control C. Just paste that in, Control V. All I need to do now is once that file is in there, if I go back to my Excel spreadsheet, take a look at the bottom. If I go up to my Query tab, I have a refresh button. All I need to do is click on refresh and it's going to pull through that 2019 data because I've created a link to that folder and it's going to include anything that's included in there. So lots of advantages to using Power Query, particularly if you're using large data sets, if you want to clean them up, loads of different utilities in there. We definitely don't have time to go through all of the different ways that you can clean things up in Power Query. That would be an entire lesson on its own. But hopefully you've seen there a few ways that you can clean in Excel, how you can deal with text files and CSV files and Access files, and also a little bit of an introduction to using Power Query.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.